everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we talk about the week's hottest legal topics. Today, we are going to be talking about ICE. What can ICE do and what can't it do? We are first going to talk about the U.S. District Court case out in Illinois regarding sanctuary cities. Do cities have to comply with ICE directives? Does their law enforcement have to participate and help federal law enforcement? We're going to break that down based on the first U.S. District Court that we know of that has reviewed this type of claim. We're next going to talk about the roving patrols case. This is out in California. This is also regarding ICE. Who can they pick up? How can they determine who they pick up? And what has the district court said there? Finally, we're also going to talk about birthright citizenship. There was the recent case that came down from the Supreme Court saying, we're not going to rule on it yet. So now what have the courts done when it went back to the district courts in the federal jurisdictions? And what is the new rule from, let's see, this is New Hampshire, I believe. What's the new rule that's been set forward? And do we think that the Supreme Court's going to go for it? I'm Vile Tehrani. I'm the co-host of The Weekly Wine, and we are supported and hosted by The Law Unscripted. That's a company doing bar review as well as these podcasts and its own podcast. So check that out if you're studying for the bar. My co-host is Dr. John Vile. He's the Dean of the Honors College at Middle Tennessee State University, and he's an expert in the Constitution, the amending process, and constitutional law. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
All right. We've been gone for a couple of weeks, and we're back on track, and I'm back on track with some wine. I figured this deserved some wine.
I wish I could just turn this into wine, but I
know,
don't have that
water.
capability.
Maybe one of these days, I swear. So my wine, I actually got a bottle of this for my anniversary dinner, and I loved it. So I got another, and I am going to be drinking a Côte de Rhône. This is Cristia, Domaine de Cristia 2021, and it's a beautiful red wine. So cheers. Grab your own glass of wine or your favorite drink for happy hour or your morning commute, and we will get started on the weekly wine.
Stay hydrated. I'll drink to that.
Properly hydrated. Yes, I like that. All right. So, Dr. Vile, let's start with the sanctuary cities. Okay. This is a U.S. district court, and we're all in district court right now. These are going to have to go up into the courts of appeal. And then it's going to go, some of these may go up to the Supreme Court. My guess is ultimately these issues are all going to go up to the Supreme Court because I'm guessing there's going to be a circuit split. What do you think?
Wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, so as our constitutional law scholar, what is a circuit split? So people will know what exactly that is and why that would go up to the Supreme Court.
Right. I mean, all U.S. courts have the power of judicial review, which is to approve or disapprove laws on the basis of their constitutionality. And it is not uncommon, particularly in cases where the Supreme Court has either been unclear or maybe not decided, or where maybe you've gotten a message from the court that maybe an existing precedent is sort of weakening. It's not uncommon in that circumstance for differing courts to come down to differing judgments on the legal issues involved. So typically you start out at a U.S. district court, or sometimes it goes through the state system and gets up to a state Supreme Court. But typically what happens, and if all of them seem to say the same, all of them come to the same judgment, then unless the Supreme Court is really convinced that they're absolutely wrong and, they're off the rails and we got to intervene, they're less likely to intervene than if you have the Ninth Circuit saying one thing and the Third and the Fifth Circuit saying another. And to some extent, the same is true of your district courts as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I can't imagine all of the U.S. courts of appeals who are taking up these issues are going to agree. I think we're going to have the red states disagreeing with the blue states in jurisdiction. So I think that this will be a fairly substantial issue. And I think we've all been waiting for it. I know.
Well, and actually there's sort of, as we'll see with these cases, there's sort of a series of immigration related issues.
Exactly. And as someone who lives in Maryland, we are one of those states that is being targeted by Trump,
Right.
and even the county that I live in, Montgomery County, we're being targeted as one of these sanctuary cities. And our funding has been threatened. There are all sorts of things that have been threatened for our specific county and through our state for multiple cities, as we're allegedly sanctuary cities. And for the most part, there are some that are in the county and in the state.
Right. And so everybody understands. I mean, a sanctuary city, I'm not sure there's a formal definition,
No,
but it basically means we're not going to push immigration issues as long as people stay out of trouble.
right.
I don't think there's any jurisdiction that I know of, unless by mistake, that would purposely release someone who's been convicted of murder or rape or robbery or
No,
something like that. But
absolutely
some
not.
of them, I mean, much like if you want to think about past administrations, Obama administration would probably be a good example. They deported actually a fair number of people, but
Right.
they were, for the most part, they were going after people that had legal judgments against them and that had succeeded. And so
Exactly.
sanctuary cities, it's basically sort of a live, let live. If you're going, if you're working in the fields all day and supporting your family and you're not driving drunk or beating your wife,
Right.
what do we care? Uh,
Exactly.
or the same, if you're working in a factory or a processing plant, as long as you're behaving yourself, uh, you're probably adding more than you're taking away.
Exactly. Basically, it's lack of affirmative action
Right,
for
right.
ICE
And
and
and and
for
and
enforcement.
right, and this, I mean, this is, as you've identified three issues. Why don't we deal with the easier one first,
Oh,
which
there's
is
an
this.
easier one?
Well, the Barbara versus Trump, which is this case involving who is a citizen.
Sure.
And, as we've discussed before, 14th Amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens. And so, for 100 years or better, the U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted that to mean if you're born in the United States and you're not uh, a part of an invading army, and you're
Right.
not a child of a diplomat, and I found that there is another exception when it was done, or you're not a Native American who at the time was on a reservation and hence
Oh,
not directly subject to the United States in the same way.
okay.
You are a citizen if you're born here. And Trump has challenged that. Trump has said, if you're born of parents, even if who are in the United States illegally, then you cannot
Correct.
be a U.S. citizen. And where we would do if we were going to if we were starting over with the 14th Amendment, I'm not sure, but 14th
Right.
Amendment is pretty clear on the matter.
Right. We're
Uh,
not starting over. The only way technically to start over is to make a new amendment.
that's right, and I don't think there'd really be that much support for it. But in any event, the Supreme Court had a case several weeks back in which they narrowed the the scope of remedies that they would provide. In this case, you had parents who were suing to make sure that their children born in the United States remain citizens.
Correct.
And if I recall correctly, by the time it got to the court, they were already citizens because they had already been born, and Trump's
Sure.
edict did not yet go into effect. And the Supreme Court basically said, if you bring a case on your own behalf, then we'll give you a remedy on your behalf, but we don't want particularly a district court, one of 94 courts, and
Right.
we don't want each of 94 courts determining national policy. So we're going to limit it to the actual participants in the case.
Right. It was more of it wasn't we're going to define birthright citizenship. They said we're going to determine whether a US district
That's
court
right.
can enter an injunction across
That's
the
right.
entire country for one
That's right.
issue.
And one can make a stronger case for that, I think, than you can for the underlying argument that, you know, power needs to be, you don't want 94 different voices all
Right.
deciding at one time what national policy should be.
And
So
you
in
wouldn't
this
know
most
which order to
recent
follow.
case, which is called Barbara versus Trump, Barbara is one of the plaintiffs. The court actually allows states to enter in, and in this first case, and I wish I could, is it, I can't remember the name of it, my apologies, but in the case where they did not permit the individuals to go beyond their own remedies, the court did say this doesn't necessarily preclude a class action suit. And
Right.
so what's happened in Barbara versus Trump is the court has accepted, or at least a majority, and I think this may be I don't remember if it's a U.S. circuit or if it's a U.S. well, U.S. district court, I think.
Yeah, I think it's New Hampshire U.S.
Oh,
District Court.
yeah, okay. In that case, they have decided that states who face logistical problems in knowing what to do if some people born in the United States are citizens because they're in a state that recognizes another, that states can therefore have standing and they can bring a class action suit. So, and the court had suggested that in the previous case that that
Right.
they would accept certain class action suits are a little bit harder to establish standing for them. So it opens the door. But the two cases that bear most directly are
Yes.
the two others that you mentioned, U.S. versus Illinois, which comes out of
Right.
Chicago, and then there's a related case, Perdomo versus Nome,
No.
which comes out of California. So I guess to look at the Chicago case, basically what happens is the national government says we're cracking down on immigration.
Yes.
We want state authorities, anytime you have somebody in custody and you find out they're illegal, we want you to tell us.
Help us
And
out.
and when you release them, we want you to tell us where you're going to release them and when you're going to do it so we can pick them up and deport them.
Basically, act as our agents.
That's right.
And many of these sanctuary cities, including those in Maryland, like we were discussing earlier, it's not that they're not complying with ICE or federal agents. What they're just not openly saying, calling up and saying, "Hey, I'm telling on this person, come and get them." Now they will call and place, have ICE place ICE holds on those who have been convicted of serious felonies or
Like
those who
violent
are being
crimes and that sort of thing.
exactly
Yes.
being held for that. So it's not like they're releasing heinous criminals or not telling the federal government about them. But yeah, they're not doing active roving patrols in
Right.
any of the community to go find them. If
And
they
what's
happen into the system,
right.
they'll deal with them within the system, but they're not going farther than if they enter into some kind of police authority.
Right.
And here, what we're looking at is, well, if ICE says you have to report on your fellow person, do you have an affirmative duty to call up ICE and report on anyone that you know that is an illegal citizen?
Right. And the court in this case out of Chicago uh, says you don't have to. So they introduce what's known as, and it's not a new principle. And in fact, usually Republicans are on the side of federalism, or in the last 30, 40 years, they
Which
have been
is,
the ones saying national authority, we have the nation, we have the states, states retain police powers,
yes,
health, safety, morals, and whatever their local communities. And the national government cannot force local authorities to do something that they don't want to do.
correct. And this is the thing that boggles my mind is Republicans have generally been the party, like you're saying, who have supported federalism,
Right.
which is more of states' rights as opposed to a stronger national government. And what we're seeing now is a complete control grab
Well,
by Donald Trump of everything, of everyone, and away from the state.
and it's not even just governments. I know this is a different topic for a different day,
Right.
but
schools.
the settlement that was reached with Columbia University. Okay, we'll give you
Correct.
$221 million because you've frozen $400 million of our aid. Uh,
Right.
we have a one of the Tennessee senators is going after a traditionally Baptist, now largely private university in the state, saying, you haven't conformed with DEI. Well, these are areas that traditionally you'd say, well, too bad, they're a
It's the
private
state.
entity. They can do what they want, or with
Exactly. Private entities have never been subject,
right,
or rarely been subject to federal rules unless there's a specific constitutional issue.
right,
But in this, for Trump and his administration to seek to control state universities, public universities,
and private
private
universities. This is
universities,
yes,
to control law firms, to control individual entities, individual
right.
people, it's so contrary to basic federalism principles that I'm surprised the GOP hasn't come and said, wait a minute, are we changing parties? We want states' rights. Don't stick the federal government into our
Right,
affairs and our
states,
business.
states' rights have sometimes been used to mask discrimination,
Correct.
whatever. So that that I'm not saying that states should never be subject to federal jurisdiction, but what the court is saying, I mean, there's a clean line of cases which say basically what this case says is the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois do not have authority to obstruct federal enforcement efforts. But by the same token, the government cannot commandeer them to
Mhm.
do something which is against their own state policy. So if the national government wants to enforce it, it has to enforce it on its own. Now that
Sure.
leads us into this Perdomo, I believe it is,
Yeah. Perdomo versus Nome,
versus Nome, which comes out of Los
California,
Angeles. And
where ICE has been very, very active, and where the National Guard was
well,
put in
National
by
Guard and
Trump.
the Marines were called in. I believe the Marines have since been called
Removed.
back, if
Mhm.
I'm correct. But basically, what has happened there, and some of this has been happening in Nashville, which is close to where I live, and probably some
Yeah.
other cities in the country, where you have mask officers, and that's another issue, surrounding people, picking them up, taking them to jail, and then occasionally letting somebody go if they've but what they
Right.
found
And
in this
not telling
California
people where they've
case,
gone. Yeah.
yeah, what they found in this California case is that they were showing the ICE agents were showing up in places that were congregated with people of color,
Mm.
people with accents, and it seems like there was one other thing. Oh, and at places where they believed immigrants congregated. So apparently they congregate at swap meets. If they ever start going to estate sales, I'm going to be in real trouble. They're going to be hauling me out of there. In fact, maybe I need to call on some of my friends to clean it out and give me a little bit better chance before I get there.
That's right.
But basically what the charge is that the court accepted is that they are using racial stereotypes. And probably
Yes.
everybody's heard the expression driving while black.
That's exactly where I was headed. You
Yeah.
got there before me.
Okay.
Hmm.
You know, and this is a problem. I can remember years and years ago, probably 40 years ago. I still don't know if he said this to pull my leg or if he meant it, but I was with a law enforcement officer at the university, and we passed, I guess it was a Cadillac. It was being driven by an African American. And he said, if I were on patrol, I'd pull this guy over. And I said, why? Because he's black. He can't afford
Right.
that Cadillac. And it's complete. And again, he may have been just pulling my leg, but it sounded serious enough that I was concerned.
Well,
Uh,
it's so serious that we have a number, like you're saying earlier. a clean set of cases that specifically prohibit this type of enforcement. We have even down to DUI checkpoints where
Right,
you can't do it on a discriminatory basis. You have to set them up in a neutral manner at a neutral place and
right,
time where anyone who's driving on that road has to go through the same checkpoint.
right,
You can't do it in any other way. And that's just a small example is you can't pull someone over just because of the color of their skin. You can't stop someone just because of their accent. You have to have reasonable cause
right,
to believe that they're committing a crime to even engage with them, and then probable cause that they're committing a crime to arrest them. And in
right,
this case, these roving patrols are picking up and arresting anyone who is having a bad day with their accent, or anyone who is of different colored skin or in that location. And like you said, they're sorting it out later, but that's
right.
completely unconstitutional.
Well, and the court also found in this case that they were not giving due process, that after they arrested people, they wouldn't tell them,
Yeah.
why they were being arrested. They did not give them access to attorneys. And the theory is, well, they're not citizens, so we don't need to do
But
so.
they're
But
under
they're
our
making that
jurisdiction.
determination first. Even if you were a non-citizen, you'd have certain rights. But
Correct.
you don't know who a non-citizen is until you've talked to their lawyer and given them a chance to produce papers.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter because even non citizens in regular court
No, that's
hearings
right.
charged with
There's
regular crimes
they're still
have
human beings.
Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. They
Yes.
have to be given Miranda warnings. They have to be given due process, no matter their criminal status or illegal status or legal status. It doesn't matter. So they're completely denying the Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights to any of these people. They're not being told their charges. They're not being told, like you said, that they have a right to an attorney. And in this case, it is a punitive charge. It
Sure.
is jailable. Okay. So, yes,
Well,
it's
it's deportable, which
exactly,
is
it's pending, it's deportable. But what's happening is while pending deportment, they are jailing them. And if you
yes,
have the ability to be jailed, you have the right to counsel.
right, right.
And they're denying this.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I think it's, I think it's pretty, and if I'm not a very good judge of public opinion, but
mhm,
I I think many people who favor mass deportations do so under the illusion, what I believe to be the illusion, that most people living in the United States who aren't citizens are criminals.
right.
And I don't believe the evidence points to that. In fact, much of the evidence suggests that, if anything, they're probably more victims because they're afraid to report crimes against themselves for fear
Exactly.
that they will get in trouble. And
Exactly.
I don't think most Americans think it's very American to pick somebody up on the basis of the color of skin and accent and send them to jail.
Right.
I just believe that they're better angels of American nature than that.
Right. I mean, we're
And I
not
could be
supposed to
wrong.
pick up someone based on their religion or their gender.
Right.
None of these pieces. And I'll say this, as far as picking them. Okay, so let me get my thought back here
Mhm.
because I felt like I had a real good point. Oh,
I'm sure you
yes.
did.
I
The
I,
best
I
ones
always
always
think
elude us.
I always think I have a good point. But in this particular issue, I've been really considering if you go back to the campaign. Let's go back to the campaign and Trump's consistent statement, his scare statement of the other countries are releasing all of the criminals,
Right.
all of
That's
the murderers, all of the
false. Yeah.
rapists, all of those in the mental, institutions. Where are they?
Right.
Why don't we hear about the mass deportations of all of these released murderers, rapists,
Yeah.
mental asylum people from these other countries? And he was promising mass deportations of these people.
Right.
We get into the start of the administration, and you and I have discussed this multiple times, is this Venezuelan gang, right? About 300 something people, and then maybe another 200 something were picked up. And we have this issue, this constitutional issue, as to whether there's an invasion
right.
of Venezuelan
And
gang
it's
members or
certainly not
citizens.
a tradition. It's not what we've typically understood to be an invasion.
Right. But
Uh,
if there is, where are all these Venezuelans? Why aren't we picking them up? Why aren't there reports about all of these Venezuelan gang members who are invading the country in mass numbers? Why aren't we arresting and deporting them? Why
well, and
aren't
of
we
course, the
deporting
local
these other
one, and we
people?
share, is it Romney?
Oh, I
The
don't remember.
okay, or Hamdi. Okay, the person who was arrested in Tennessee, who is actually a native of Maryland, the latest decision on him
Oh, right.
is that he is not. I mean, there is not sufficient evidence to show that he was trafficking.
Right.
He was driving a car and there were immigrants in it. That doesn't make you a trafficker.
Right. It doesn't
Uh,
meet the intent
right.
that is required to prove a crime. You can't just have an act. We go back to the very basics of criminal
Mens rea.
law. You have to have mens rea, which is intent to commit the crime, and then the act of committing the crime. You can't have just one because goodness knows if there was an intent to commit a crime, I myself probably would have been arrested quite a few times over the number of decades here, rather than prosecuting crimes or defending crimes. It's more of a you have to have the combination. And if you don't, goodness, I'm just as a criminal attorney, this is really getting to me. Clearly, my voice is going higher. I'm getting more upset and more animated. But let's end on these jailable issues. If we're jailing people, again, we go back to they have rights: the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, the right to due process. And instead, there are some that are now being put into what's being called alligator Alcatraz down in Florida. That there's questions about, did the federal government set it up? Did they fund it? Did the state fund it and set it up on their own? But
Well,
as my understanding,
right,
it's basically a tent camp in the
right.
middle of nowhere in the swamp in Florida, where it's
Very hot,
essentially
very humid,
very,
uh,
very hot and humid.
and
They're not in air conditioning. They're not even in a building. They're in essentially tents with cots and bunk beds, and they're not there's basically a
and
moat around
and
them with
the
alligators.
closest that we've ever come to this in our history, and
Japanese.
this was debated in this first suit that we talked about involving birthright citizenship. The closest parallel is Korematsu versus United States.
The Japanese
There,
internment
right.
camps.
After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, we round up 112,000 people or so in the West Coast, send them to detention camps for fear that, they might be enemies.
And it was
And
shameful.
well, it
And
was,
we've
and the Supreme Court has since repudiated it, and the U.S.
exactly.
Congress has subsequently given reparations to at least those who remained alive who had suffered from this.
There
And
was at least, though, some idea of, okay, well, we have a war against Japan with
yeah,
Japan. And there's not that I'm saying it's excusable, but
right.
at least there was a better reason. In this case, there is no war that we're in. We're picking people up and putting them in
Well,
internment
if
camps.
you're willing to describe immigrants as invaders, then we're in a comparable situation. And I think this goes back to George Orwell in 1984.
Yes.
You can put a label on something that doesn't make it so.
Right.
Uh,
There are goodness,
yeah.
there's no bombs, there's no yeah. So
Anyway,
anyway, so this alligator Alcatraz is certainly to me morally reprehensible.
well,
People can disagree with me, but
it's
on a
symbolic.
moral level.
It's intended to say we're going to make I mean, all of these actions. My understanding is Trump hasn't deported as many people or more people than Obama was deporting, but
Right.
he's making a bigger show of it. And
Exactly.
so, you look at it and you say, yeah, that's where rapists belong. That's where murderers belong. And then you read the fine print and you find out, well, this person's never been arrested for anything.
Right.
This person has a job.
If we're
But
looking for the murderers and rapists, go into our criminal courts and find the illegal immigrants who have been convicted of those and deport them. They're going to be in our jails. I guarantee you.
Sure.
If they've been convicted on those charges, they are almost likely all likely to still be in our jails. So start with our jails and deportation from there. And
Yeah.
then we'll even clear up
And
jails.
again, I don't think you're gonna, even in a sanctuary city, I don't think you're gonna find many of them defending these people.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
they,
people are horrified because their local church people are being picked up. High school
well,
students who
pastors in some cases,
graduated,
yes.
pastors, teachers, people that they've, that, oh, they're pillars of our community. And I guess
Right.
you just didn't know they were illegal, but very strong members of our society, even in Maryland with the specific laws that we have. Mr. Sadiq came months ago to talk about it. And he said, look, they even pay their taxes.
Well,
You
absolutely.
so they're contributing, they're actually helping the state and our economy. And these are most of the people that at least seem to be picked up.
And
There's
it would
certainly
be,
no public
yeah,
information that's getting out about more Venezuelan gang members or
if
more
we could,
felons.
be convinced that our borders are largely sealed
Right.
against criminals, um, and that those who remain illegally in the United States were not among them,
Right.
it's possible that we could get something similar to laws that have been proposed giving retroactive citizenship and, for Donald Trump, charge him each $5,000, make a money-making activity out of it, and
Use it as a money making scheme.
everybody will be happy. I think there's Richard Nixon, President Nixon opened up the door to China
Mm,
in a way that no Democrat probably could have done because the Republicans, correctly or not, were always perceived as more anti-communist. And there's a possible opening here if the president ever if he wants to forge a legacy,
right.
say we seal the borders, we've gotten rid of those who are criminals. Now let's find a way and make them pay to become
Yeah,
citizens. So we'll see.
exactly.
That's a very optimistic, overly optimistic, probably view of what could happen or will
Sure.
happen, but it could happen or something
There's at
like
least an option.
yeah.
There seem to be better options, but as my husband keeps saying, the hard part right now with Democrats is it's anti-Trump, but there's
Right.
no proposal for what to do differently. And if there were something Republican, Democrat,
Well, I mean,
anybody
there
out
has been a
there,
long time proposal that people who have, been here for X number of years and came as children, that they should be considered citizens.
sure. But
So
that's not being, I think he has a fair point of that's not in that's not being proponent, there's no real
well,
proponent
in
raising
fairness,
holy heck
Democrats
out
aren't able to
there.
do very much because they don't have a majority in either house. So
True.
they can propose what we have this. We said we weren't going to talk about it probably, but you have Republicans right now who would love to have some hearings on Epstein matter and whatever. Then
Absolutely.
Democrats and Republicans are saying we don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
anyway,
there's that issue, and we'll have to take that up in another one. We haven't
yeah,
and we
fair
haven't
enough.
been doing the real criminal issues lately, but that's an interesting one that we probably should handle. So stay tuned with us as we continue. We're going to be doing another episode regarding First Amendment rights, some interesting issues with religion and abortion. So make sure to pick up that episode. Also, make sure to pick up the other recent episode regarding LGBTQ rights and the Supreme Court's decisions. Don't forget to check out www.thelawunscripted.com for help with your law review and bar classes. Especially look at the hypotheticals. We do some really interesting hypotheticals about an hour where we've made up our own for each subject and we've proposed them where you can walk along with us as what would your response be and would it be consistent with one that's an A plus on a bar examination. So check that out. And for everyone else, check out our merchandise on the website too. Get some coffee tumblers, some shirts, and join us next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.